Hey everybody, welcome into this Adobe Photoshop tutorial brought to you as always by tutvid.com. If you're new around here, my name is Nathaniel Dodson. Today we're going to take a look at creating this 3D character, just, I don't know, cool plunging through space effect here in Photoshop using Adobe Fuse. If you're not familiar with Fuse, we'll play with that a little bit. If you do enjoy this tutorial, make sure you subscribe to my channel and turn those notifications on because subscribing doesn't really do much of anything anymore, but notifications still do. Let's jump into Photoshop now and check this thing out. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is open up Adobe Fuse, and this is it, F-U-S-E Fuse. If you've got Creative Cloud, you can download Fuse. I believe it's completely free. Just a quick interlude here. If you're not interested in following along with the Fuse part of this tutorial, you can use the link down in the description of this video and download. I've got this 3D character that we're about to create available as a free download. Here's what you would do. Download it, and you're going to download the zip file. Just unzip it, and then you're going to have the tutvid space model folder. Open it. You have all these textures, all this different stuff. This is really what you want right here, tutvid space model.obj. Drag it and drop it in your Photoshop document and just commit. Say, okay, that's great. And you'll see the character is going to be imported right into Photoshop. If, however, you're interested in building the character in Fuse, stick around in the tutorial and we will get creating this character right now. And here, while we wait for Fuse to open, it's basically an app to create simple 3D characters that can easily be animated or used in Photoshop or all sorts of different things. We're going to quickly throw together just a female just because the body type kind of is going to fit with what we're doing a little bit better. So we'll go female, female fit A for the torso. I'm just clicking on them right over here and give Fuse a second to do its thing. Female fit A again for the legs. And now we've got just the head, body, legs, and then female fit A for the arms. And there we have it. We have all of that. We can go to customize, which is like, you know, how long or short or fat or thin and all that stuff you want everything to be. I think she's fine just the way she is. We're going to go over to clothing, and what I want to use are, I'm just looking for something with a lot of stuff on it. Something like this tactical response jacket. See all the little pockets and stuff? Because essentially we want her to look like a spaceman, or in her case, a space woman, but you're not going to be able to tell whether she's male or female by the time we're done with this. So I just want all those gizmos and things that are on the tactical response vest. Let's go to the bottoms here, and there's a lot of interesting stuff. We'll probably go tactical response here as well, because again, there's just a lot of stuff. There's the weapon holster, the knee pads. There's a lot of stuff going on. Shoes, the firefighter boots are interesting, but they're a little big and bulky. They look like waders or something. So I think I'm going to go with some of these tactical boots. A or B probably will work fine. We can hit the little loop-de-loo cursor here, and we can spin her around just to see. You can see not too big, not too small. They look just right. So I think that's good. Let's go to hair. The hair is not going to matter all that much. I'll just see if there's like a ponytail. There it is. Let's go alpha ponytail. That's probably fine for her. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. The hat, on the other hand, we are going to look for... This is kind of cool, the Ops Core helmet. It's got the little microphone that she can speak into. So maybe we'll go with that. That's interesting. And we'll see if we can find something that looks like a face mask here with eyewear. They're the goggles. Beards, we probably don't need to give her a beard. Down here under masks, there we go. Gas mask, dual canister. I love it. And if we want to take it a step further, we can go up to eyewear and throw, maybe not the safety glasses, although the safety glasses aren't bad, but probably the full-fledged goggles would be what you would wear if you're floating through outer space. And last but not least, down here in gloves, we're going to skip mustaches and beards because, number one, she's a lady. Number two, can't see it underneath all of this mask stuff. I'll just go with the tactical response. Again, the gloves that look like they have the most going on them. You can see she doesn't match. That's totally fine because we're not going to see any of these colors or anything, and you'll see exactly why in a little bit. What I'll do here is I will save her to my CC library, and I'll call her whatever I want. I can say Fuse model, I can say spaceman or space woman, there we go, something like that, and I would save it probably to my images library. It depends on the libraries you have set up. You would just hit save and you'll have a little loading bar that shows up, but I've already saved her and I've got a version of her over in Photoshop now. Speaking of Photoshop, here we are, and I'm going to create a new document. I just bumped Fuse to the background there for a second. We're going to create a brand new document, 1920 by 1080, resolution 72. You can kind of stick with everything default. We'll adjust what we need to as we need to. Up here under the libraries panel, if you don't have this, you can go window, libraries. Here I'm in my images library. Remember, we chose to save our model to the images library. By the the way, once you save it, it'll automatically sync up with Photoshop. I'm going to close graphics. I'm going to open models. I've got 2 models. There's Fuse model. This is the one that we just created. I didn't end up naming her Space Woman. And I'll just drag and drop her right here into my document. And there she is. Remember I said we would do something to basically make her, we're going to get rid of all the detail. We're going to do it here by hitting the little eyeball and shutting off all of our textures. See that? Now it's just like a plasticky looking character. I'm going to hit the little arrow key to just bump that up and hide it. Now I want to select my workspaces and go to the 3D workspace because we want to open both our 3D panel and also our 3D properties panel here. Really, it's just the properties panel that has to do with 3D objects. First thing we'll do here is select our model. So this is it, Gloves Skeleton is what it's called. We're going to select Gloves Skeleton. And we have all of these different poses to choose from. So she doesn't have to be doing this T pose. Now, you can find these poses. You can hit the little cogwheel options menu and choose not just animations and poses, just poses. We don't want any animation here. We just want the poses. And one of the things I did was I hit the little flyout menu and I chose large thumbnail as well. I believe the default is small, either large or small list. Either way, the pose that I'm looking for, I believe it's this one here. Let me see. Floating legs bent, arms and legs spread. Maybe it's not that. I'm looking for one that's sort of falling. See this one on toes, back arch. That might be a little extreme. This one here is kind of interesting. Floating bent forward. I'm looking for one. I believe it's called floating legs bent. Floating back arched. I'm going to type into this, floating, and all the different floating poses show up. So what's this one here? There we go, floating legs bent. I think we'll try clicking that one, and you'll see everything changes. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be kind of interesting enough that it would work if it was somebody kind of flying through outer space. You can see really kind of any of these will probably work depending on how you end up working with them and stylizing them. I'm just going to go with something that I think is going to look decent for us. All right, so I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit, and you can see right now our material, it's really high, really low quality, excuse me. The edges are very jagged. I'm ignoring that for a second because we haven't rendered anything, but all of the materials look really like wet, gooey, almost wet plastic shiny. So what I'm going to do to get rid of some of that reflectiveness, that sort of slickness, is I'm going to select body matte here. You can see it's underneath my glove skeleton or within glove skeleton. Select body matte, hold down shift and select gloves matte. So we're selecting all those materials. And I'm going to set the shine here to 0. You're going to see it's going to make things really bright. And reflection from 4% to 0%. Then I am going to set the specularness, or probably specular highlights, or specular color as Photoshop is telling me. We're going to set this here to the red. We're going to set the red, let's try 25, a low red count. The green, we'll bump a little green in there at about 65, and then we'll mainly influence blue. So we're just giving this a specular color of this bluish color. I'll hit OK. It still does not at all look impressive. Don't worry about that. We're going to clean this up in just a second. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so you can kind of see everything again. I am going to choose my environment here. So these are all the elements in our 3D scene here. Our actual model, the camera position, the light, the scene as a whole, and then the environment. So here in the environment, we're going to shut off the IBL, the image-based light. If we leave that turned on when we render this out, it's going to come out much brighter than we expect it to be. That's not what I want to do here for this particular project, so we're shutting off the IBL. And now let's begin playing with the light, because part of the reason this is so blown out is because we're just flooding a ton of light right into the front of our object. So let's start with infinite light number 1. And you can see this, almost imagine this is the sun, and this straight bar pointing into it is sort of where the light is pointing, right? So if I move the light over this way, you can see it as if it's coming from the top right corner of our scene. I'm going to select here the intensity up in the properties panel. I'm going to bump it back to 100. I'm going to select the color because we want to give this kind of a cyan color. So I'm going to say, or we're going to get rid of all the red in it, and then we're going to reduce some of the green, and the blue, we're going to reduce a little bit of that as well. So it's going to be this very, very bright blue color. And then I'm going to select the little coordinates icon so we can position the light a little bit better. And I'm going to position this, the X, negative 165 degrees, the Y is going to be 45 degrees, and the Z is going to be 165 degrees non-negative. And there we go. It might take a second to just update for you. Negative 165 for the X, 45 for the Y, 165 straight up for the Z. And you can see it's as if the light is coming from up here in the top right corner, just like so. One light, however, is not enough. It is a nice moody looking version of what we have, but we want it to be even more interesting. So down here at the bottom of the 3D panel, I'm going to hit the little light bulb icon and choose a new and a second infinite infinite light. You're going to see this new light is just blasting straight into our subject. We're going to make sure we have that infinite light selected. We're going to go to first the light properties. Intensity is already 100%. That's great. But I'm going to select the color. We're going to change this. We're going to make this more of a hot pink color. So this is going to need a lot of red. We'll set red to like 245, excuse me. 255 is the max in that color channel. And then for the blue, we'll set it to like 175. So it's kind of this, you know, heavily red influenced hot pink color. We'll hit OK. And we'll go to the coordinates here. And this one, we want the light to look like it's kind of coming from the bottom left-ish area. So for the X, I'm going to say, hey, 145 for you, negative 45 on the Y, and then a negative 145 for the Z. So you can see the pink is sort of lighting up the left side of our model, whereas the blue is lighting up the right side of our model. And now that we have the lights, we're going to rotate our model, move them kind of into position how we want them to be. So I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. We're going to select our model, the glove skeleton object here, and now the coordinates that appear in the properties panel have to do with our model. All I'm really going to change is the Y-axis. I just want to tilt our space person over toward the left a little bit, so I'm going to go negative 45. Voila, just like that. And the beauty of the 3D object is the 3D element is going to interact with those lights that we established. See, the blue light is still outlining the right side, the pink light is still outlining the left side perfectly. We got this heavy shadow on the front, just covering up any extra details that might just be too much for us. One thing that I do want to do, I want to get rid of the shadow. I don't want there to be any shadows. So for infinite light number 1, we're going to come up here to the light properties and we're going to uncheck shadow. That's going to get rid of the main shadow. And then just to be consistent here in infinite light 2, I'm also going to shut off the shadow. One of the things it's going to do is open up. You can see some of the front of the space person's body as well. But mainly, I just want to get rid of that floor shadow. And I kind of like the way it is. One last thing I'll do is here, now that I've selected scene, I will also get rid of the shadows here. I'm going to uncheck shadows for the scene. It's just going to loosen up some of the shadows in our object as things stand. All right, so I'm going to go back to layers. Don't worry, I just accidentally selected something there. And I have my 3D layer. What I want to do is duplicate my 3D layer by hitting Command or Control J, and then I'm going to shut off the original 3D layer because that's just what we're working from. If we need to get back and change something, we can do that. I want to render this current 3D layer, so I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit here. What I'm going to do is Command or Control click the layer thumbnail because I want to select as little as possible so Photoshop renders this as quickly as possible. And now that I have this selection, I'm going to go Select, Modify. I'm going to expand the selection just a little bit, maybe by 20 pixels. That's great, just to make sure all of my 3D object is encompassed within this. Now, before we go and start rendering, a couple things. Up here under Photoshop Preferences 3D, you can set a ray trace high quality threshold. The higher this is, the longer it's going to take to render. But something like 6 is going to render you a really nice result for most things that you'll do, and it'll be pretty quickly. Like for my computer, this render will probably take about 2 minutes. So I'm going to go 3D. I'm going to say render this 3D layer, and we wait. And there we have it. Render is finished. I can go select, deselect, and before we do anything with this 3D layer, I'm going to right-click on it and choose to rasterize the 3D. This is part of the reason that I well, not even part of the reason. This is the reason that I duplicated the original 3D layer, because essentially, if we want to change this now, we need to go back to the original 3D layer. This might as well be a flat piece of artwork. We can position it wherever we want. I am going to go edit free transform. Actually, I'm going to right-click on this and choose to convert it to a smart object in case I want to scale it up a little bit. And then we'll go edit free transform. Hold down Alt or Option and the Shift key, and we'll just scale down a little bit to get our little character here in the middle of our scene. I should probably keep it zoomed out a little bit. And then I'll hit Command or Control A to select all, grab the Move tool, and probably just quickly align it to the center of everything. Select, deselect to get rid of our selection. All right, so let's quickly drop our background behind our space person, and then we'll start building everything out. I'm going to go back to my original workspace here because I want my libraries open again, because I have a stock photo that I got from Adobe Stock. I'm going to drag this in and drop it in my document. I'll move it up here and just hold down Shift and drag it out, something like that. It does not at all have to be perfect, but you can make it as perfect or not as you want. Commit that change, and we're going to drag this down beneath our 3D model. In fact, I'll rename this 3D model, just so we know. Background layer here, I will delete because we don't need that anymore. And for our Adobe stock here, we don't need it really connected to the cloud. I'm going to right-click, and I'll choose Embed Linked Image. Voila. And I'm going to duplicate it, Command or Control J. Now what I want to do is blur this quite severely. I'm going to shut off the top nebula here, and I'm going to work with the bottom one filter, blur. Let's try blurring this like 100 pixels and see what it looks like. So we'll go 100 pixels. Look at this interesting conundrum we have here. Really, really bad banding all over the image. It looks really bad. It would look horrible as a finished effect. Here's how we combat it. We're going to temporarily go image mode 16 bits per channel, and we will apply the blur in 16-bit mode, filter, blur, Gaussian blur. This just gives Photoshop about 20 times as much data to work with, and look at how much more smooth that blur is. There is absolutely no banding. We'll hit OK. Now there is still some transparency. See the checker pattern? We'll combat that by going Command or Control J a couple times just until it's solid, and then hit Command or Control E. Well, we might need to select all those layers and go Command or Control E to merge them together in our layers panel. So now we have this beautiful blurred background. I do want to still have some of this starriness on top of it, so I'm going to select this top star layer and just reduce the opacity to like 20%, just to give us some of that space texture. Let's darken up the background and decrease the contrast in it as well by adding a curves adjustment layer here. I'm going to collapse my adjustments panel. Let's double click on this curve. I'm going to just boost the black point way up and drop the white point way down. It really doesn't matter. Something about that'll work fine. And then here in the layers panel, select blend mode and choose multiply. And then we'll set this to an opacity of around 50%. We may come back to this later and realize we want to brighten it up a little bit, but you can see we're just getting this flat darkening effect to the background of our image here. I will also create a new layer, and I'm going to call this tight grain or something like that. And then I'm going to go edit fill. And I'm going to choose to fill this with 50% gray from my contents drop-down menu. Hit OK. We're going to make sure that our foreground and background colors here, we want them to be black and white. You know what? Actually, we're going to do a different type of grain. We're going to go filter and choose camera raw filter. We're going to use our camera raw grain here on this gray layer. Come over here and hit the effects tab, and we're going to just add some grain. And maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger because I can. Should I decrease? Maybe I'll increase the roughness a little bit as well. Hit OK. And if we zoom in a little bit, we can really get a good look at the grain. I'm going to set this to the soft light blend mode. You can see it's adding a whole lot of grain back there to the background. A bit too much. So we'll just reduce the opacity to about 35%. A quick before and after. Just gives us some nice texture to work with back there. All right, what we now need to do is start adding the streaks that are coming off of our space model. I'm going to collapse my properties panel just to get it out of the way. And we're going to select our 3D model layer. And in order to do this, we're going to create a new layer for each bit of streaking that we're doing. So I am going to go ahead and hit the new layer icon. And I'm going to grab my brush tool. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And we're going to be using the brush tool with, I'm going to right click here, a large soft edge brush, 500 pixels, maybe a little excessive. Let's try 100. 100 might be more like it. Yeah, I think 100 will work for us. One thing we do need to do is we need to go image mode and set it back to 8 bits per channel because of one of the filters that we're going to be using. It's not there in 16-bit mode. I'll begin with the pink, so I'm going to sample just the really hot pink color off of the left side of a spaceman's body, and just click to add a couple dabs of the pink there in the middle of our document. And then I'm going to grab my rectangular marquee tool, drag a big selection over the pink. It doesn't have to be exacting at all, just roughly around it. Then we'll go filter, stylize, and choose wind. Now here from wind, I'm going blast and from the right. You can do blast and from the left if you want. I'm doing from the right. Hit OK. And then we'll hit Command or Control F to repeat that filter a couple times. And then we'll hit Command or Control J to bring up free transform, hold down Shift, and rotate our little piece of artwork upward. Commit that change, and then hit Command or Control D to deselect. All right, so the idea here is we're going to add this to the arm as though it's shooting out of the top of the arm, but it really needs to be on a bit of an angle, I think. So I'm going to hit Command or Control T again, hold down your Command or Control key, and you can do what's called skewing to this artwork. So I'm going to skew this until it looks to be about the proper angle that one would expect if it were to be coming up out of our space person's arm here. So we'll just skew, 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 skew. What we may need to do, I'm going to cancel these changes, Command or Control T. We may need to just stretch this out, so just hold down Shift, stretch this out to make all of our little wavelengths a little bit taller. And then let's try to go ahead and do our skewing. This way we still have some length coming out of the arm. There we go. Something like that I think will work real nice for us. All right, so we'll commit the change. What I'm doing is I'm intentionally overshooting the hand. Don't worry, it's taking a second to just commit this change. I'm intentionally overshooting the hand with this line effect because we're going to mask this into place in just a second. Of course, we have all the overflow of the pink beneath the arm. We're going to clean that up as well. I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool, and I'm going to select the big selection right where I want this stuff to cut off. It can really be a perfectly straight line because see how sharp and cutting all of the rest of the effect is? It's perfect. Now we want to make all of the pinkish purpley residue that's within this selection disappear. So we're going to add a new mask, but we're going to hold down the Alt or Option key while clicking to add the new mask, and you can see it fills that selection we created with black, therefore creating a clean cut in our piece of artwork. Now, in order to get all this stuff cleaned up beneath the arm really cleanly, well, we can Command or Control click on our 3D model layer, make sure that we still have our mask selected up here for our little streaky line bit, and we'll go select, we'll inverse the selections. Now we've selected all the area outside of the body. We're protecting all the stuff in here. Grab the brush tool, still that large soft edge brush, and we'll flip so we're painting with black. You know what, I'm going to use my square bracket keys, make it a little bit smaller, and then just paint with black all over this, just beneath the arm, and the selection is going to allow us to be perfect there along the bottom edge of our model. And we can then go in and freeform it if we want. Clean up the fingers a little bit, clean up down here a little bit, and do whatever you want in terms of making it look just the way you want it to look. And there we've added the first piece of that effect. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just speeding the video up and I'm adding maybe 2 or 3 more pink streaks like this, and then also 2 or 3 blue streaks as well. It's real fast and easy, but instead of watching me do it for the next 20 minutes, you can just pause the video and take a look at how I do it and try to follow along as best you are able. I am creating each of these new streaky effects on their own layer, so I have a mask for each sort of piece of streaks, if you will. So we're going to create maybe 8 new layers total or something like that here. And I think that's about good, but you can spend as much or as little time playing with this as possible. You can see we added all these additional layers here. I'm going to select them all, Command or Control J, group them up, and I'm just going to call this like streaks or 8-bit streaks, or you can name it whatever you like. Point is, it's as if the body is beginning to defragment in almost that 8-bit, really broken, staggered, streaky style. I even erased like parts of the streakiness here in between the elements of the vest, just to make it look like they're wrapping around and really interacting with the clothing. I could have done it down here as well with all this stuff here on the side of the pant leg, but you know, we've got what we've got so far. Well, let's zoom out a touch here, and I'm going to shift select not only the streaks group but also the 3D model, and use the hotkey Command Option E, that's Control Alt E on the PC, to merge those selected layers up to a new layer. Now I'm going to go Edit, Free Transform, and I'm going to hold down Shift and just rotate this whole mess to the left like that. Commit the change. And we're going to go Filter. We're going to use that same wind filter. We're going to go Stylize Wind. I'm going to hit OK. And maybe I'll apply this by hitting Command or Control F, Command or Control F, just a couple times like that. I'm going to hit Command or Control T, hold down Shift, rotate it back into place. So you can see it's now covering up everything that we just did. And to blend this in a little bit, I will go use the blend mode Lighten. And then I'll double click on the layer, or you can go Layer, Layer Style, Blending Options. And here we can use our blend if sliders, so we can focus on all the darker parts of the underlying layer. Just pull those through this artwork that we see. So you can see just before and after. We're just helping blend all those new streaks into the artwork as well. So there's with none of the new streaks, there's with new streaks added. It just adds another whole layer of dimension to what we're doing. Now we want to add some almost like sparkly dotted type atmospheric elements around this. Once more, we're going to take this, we're going to shift to select all 3 of our layers, merge them up to a new layer, Command Option E, that's Control Alt E on the PC. Also, again, we'll go Command or Control T and we'll rotate him sideward. Just hold down the Shift key and rotate it around. Commit the change. We're going to add a bunch of the wind filter again, so filter wind and then Command or Control F a few times, and then we'll hit Command or Control T, again rotate back into place. We just did this, right? But not quite, because now we're going to go Filter, Blur, and we're going to choose a Motion Blur. And I'll probably motion blur it, yeah, about 200 pixels, straight up and down, 90-degree angle. There you go. Hit OK. And I'm going to set this to the layer blend mode of Dissolve. So that's giving me all these nice, like, very harsh, non-blended, sparkly effects. And then if we reduce the opacity to like 40%, it doesn't make it more transparent. It just takes away some of the sparkliness. So it's a really cool effect when you work with opacity and the Dissolve blend mode. Now, there's a little bit too much of the sparkliness in front of our model, so we are going to create a mask. We're going to Command or Control click on the model, excuse me. We're gonna call this layer sparkles or something like that, and this layer here we'll call double streaks. But here on the sparkles layer, we're going to add a layer mask. We'll go layer, layer mask. We're going to say hide the selection. So basically create a layer mask and fill our selection with black. Now, we don't want to make all the sparkliness just straight up disappear on top of our model. So I'm going to make sure we select the mask, and then we'll go Image Adjustments Levels, and we'll just boost the black point. So we're going to say, hey, whatever's black, make it like really, really dark gray. See, I just boosted it a little bit. See, we're just getting a few sparkly things above our model. That looks perfect, and I'll hit OK. One thing that's kind of bugging me is the fingers look like they're hanging out in the middle of no man's land. I'm going to go back to the streaks. This was our very first streak we created. Select the mask for it. Grab the brush tool, maybe make the brush tool a little bigger, and I'm going to go in there and just try to blend it together just a little bit more so it looks a little more realistic. And those little dots, they're going to do a nice job of helping us just make sure it looks blended, at least a little bit more blended than it did just a second ago. Now, before we go further, I'm going to zoom out. I'm looking at the background. I see like some almost reddish colors here. I want to try to make the color of the background a little bit more uniform now that we kind of have our space model in place. So above the nebula, the space layer, let's create a new layer, and let's call this color. I'm going to set it to the blend mode of color, which is going to allow whatever color I paint on this layer, it's going to colorize the layer underneath. I'm going to just work with a large brush here. I'm just using my square bracket keys to make the brush huge or small or whatever. And then I'm just going to sample the pinks and blues that I have. So I'll say like, hey, let's add some pink over here, right? Maybe we'll add a little pink up here, just make things interesting. Maybe a little bit more down here. Then we'll sample the blue. We want to make sure we make that red area much more blue. Same thing over here. We'll make this blue. Maybe add a little blue. I don't really like the blue in the corner. Maybe a little blue up here. And now that we have all this color, see all the color blobbed into the color layer, it's a little bit too harsh. So we'll go Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Maybe about 200 pixels is good. We'll hit OK. And then we can reduce the opacity a little bit just to sort of start blending things back together. It's going to bring back a little of the original color, but it's still covering things up nicely for us and just helping pull the whole scene together a little bit more. All right, let's go up above all of this here, and I'm going to create another noise or grain layer. So I'm going to get rid of the brush tool because it's giant and obnoxious and in the way. New layer, let's name it noise. Let's again go edit, fill, 50% gray. You got it, I got it, we've all got it. I want to set my foreground and background color to black and white, so hit the letter D. And then we'll go Filter, Noise, Add Noise. We're not going to use the camera raw noise here. I want this fine, very digital looking noise. Let's go about 10%, not 610%, 10%. It is Gaussian, the distribution, and monochromatic. That's important, monochromatic. You know what, actually, the colorful might actually look interesting. Let's try the colorful. I haven't tried this yet. Let's try it. We're going to go with the colorful noise. See all those different colors? And we'll set this to the blend mode of soft light. Just because of the nature of what we're doing, this very futuristic, glitchy, almost looking effect, it might be interesting. And we'll reduce the opacity here. Let's try about 40%. All right, so now that we have this, we're going to sharpen this up a little bit. So we're going to merge all of our layers to a new layer, Command-Shift-Option-E, that is going to be Control-Shift-Alt-E on the PC. And I'm going to convert this layer to black and white, so Control-Shift or Command-Shift-U. And I'm going to duplicate this layer, Command or Control-J. A lot of little hotkeys there. All right, so the top layer we're going to call High Pass 1, and the bottom layer we're going to call High Pass, you guessed it, 2. So High Pass 1 is going to be more of a fine sharpening we're going to apply to our character. We'll go Filter, Other, High Pass, and I'll probably go not with 10 pixels, but more like 2, maybe 1.5. I think 2 will be fine, and we'll set this to the blend mode Soft Light. Select High Pass 2. We will go Filter, Other, High Pass, and here we're going to do, about 10 pixels, just a giant, ridiculous amount of mid-tone clarity punch, and set this to Soft Light. Kind of destroying our effect, so we're going to reduce the opacity to like 35%. And for our High Pass 1 layer, we will also reduce the opacity to about 35%. So there's before the 2 High Pass layers, there's after the 2 High Pass layers. It just gives a little kiss of pizzazz and zip to some of those highlights. It really can just help set off the piece of artwork with which you are working. Okay, time to apply the first sort of global color treatment. I feel like I'm zooming in and out all day here. We're going to open up our adjustments panel and apply a selective color adjustment. I'm going to just collapse my adjustments panel a little bit. All right, here I'm going to work with the whites first, and I'm going to say, hey, just pump a bunch of cyan into the whites, and also get rid of a bit of the yellow, therefore adding blue to the highlights or the very whites as well. We're going to go to the blacks here. I'm going to push more cyan into the blacks. This is, by the way, is primarily going to target just the darkest areas of our 3D model. Here for magenta, I'm going to say, yeah, give me a little magenta in those shadows, plus 10 for that. Let's reduce yellow, therefore pushing some blue into the shadows. And then I really want to fade the shadows, so let's go negative 15 in the blacks. You can see it gives me this really strongly faded effect. If it's too faded, if you think it's too faded, that's fine. Just to make it negative 10 or negative 7 or whatever you think looks good for you. I want to keep it at this because I'm going to add a couple other layers, and I think it'll pull everything together for me. I'm going to also add a channel mixer. I'm going to set this to monochrome, which is going to make everything black and white. That's fine. And then I'm going to set it to the blend mode of multiply, which is really going to darken things up for us. But then I'm going to reduce the opacity to 35%. So there's before, there's after. Just darkening things up, flattening things out a little bit. I'm also going to add a color balance adjustment layer here. I'm going to go right to the shadows first. I am going to bump some red into the shadows, maybe about plus 10. And then I'm going to bump some cyan into those shadows as well. Or not cyan, magenta, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the color line above it, but I'm talking about the one below it. And then here in the highlights tone region, I'm going to push a bunch of cyan into the highlights, maybe about negative 75 or so. And then maybe, you know what, let's try pushing a little blue in there as well. I'm not going to touch magenta or green. So there's before color balance, there's after. It's also infusing a little contrast. If we shut off preserve luminosity, it'll take a little bit of the contrast away. I'm not sure what I like more. I might leave it with the contrast, but hey, it's up to you. Let's try adding a curves adjustment layer here. We're going to set the curves adjustment layer to the luminosity blend mode. It's a great way to affect an image's brightness without increasing the contrast or saturation of the colors in it. So maybe what I'll do is I'll pull the black point up a little bit here. And I don't know if I want to darken the image. Maybe I'll try darkening it and pushing a little brightness into the highlights, something like that. Before and after the curves. I kind of like it. It adds more to our faded effect. And then maybe let's try adding a color lookup table here. I'm going to go with, this is going to sound crazy, I'm going to go with the drop blues color lookup table, which is going to make everything very gray. But what I'm going to do is here, I'm going to select the mask, and I will go elliptical marquee, and I'm going to create a, well, maybe not even a huge elliptical marquee over the center object, just something like that. And then go select modify feather, and we'll feather this, I don't know, 300 pixels, something like that. It's going to say, look, it's such a huge feather, you're not going to be able to even see your selection. That's fine. And then on this color lookup table, I'm going to hit Command or Control I, which should fill that area with black, but you can see it's so subtle. 300 pixels for our selection is too much. So I'm going to go select deselect, even though we can't see the selection, it was there. Let's create another selection, and maybe this time we'll go select modify feather and try like 100. So there we go. That's a little bit more like it. Select that mask. We have black as our foreground color. We can hit Option Delete, that's Alt Backspace on the PC, and that will fill that area with black. Maybe I'll do that a couple more times just to really intensify the effect. Command or Control D to deselect. Now that's a little bit too noticeable, right? The difference between the incredibly saturated blue and then all of a sudden we have basically gray out here. So what I'll do is I'll pull that same trick that I did before. I will select this mask. You know, and actually I'm not going to lift the blacks. I'm simply going to blur this a little bit. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and maybe not 200 pixels, but maybe like 85, something like that. Hit OK. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity of this drop blues LUT to just help blend it together. Drop it to about 50%. You can see there's before, there's after. We're just taking some of the sting, some of the heaviness, if you will, out of the blues, and also making our little dude floating through space just absolutely the focal point of what we have going on here. And the last thing I might want to do, totally optional, we can just play around with it, see what it looks like. Let's merge all this stuff to a new layer. Command-Shift-Option-E, that's Control-Shift-Alt-E. I'm going to name this layer Glitch. We're going to double-click on the layer, and we're going to shut off the blue channels. So just red and green channels, that's great. And then what we might try to do is go like Filter, Distort, Wave, and we'll try to give this a little, just a little glitchy-looking effect. We'll go with like 3 generators, a wavelength of 10 and 35 minimum maximum is great. Amplitude 15 and 50, perfect, and a scale of 5% versus 1%, perfect. I'm using the square type as well. I'll hit OK, and you can see we've got this little glitchy effect we've added. Kind of interesting as a standalone effect. Maybe something where we want to duplicate up this mask here. So I'll select that mask, hold down Alt or Option, drag it, and drop it on the layer. And it just gets rid of some of the glitchiness on top of our character, but preserves the glitchiness out here in the rest of this layer. Kind of cool. I don't know. You have a lot of options at this point for what you want or what you could do. But the point is, we've gone from really just our single 3D model created with Adobe Fuse, imported into Photoshop, and we've created this cool, I don't know, dragging, particle-y, glitchy effect in Photoshop rather quickly. Yeah, well, there you have it. We created that effect. If you got this far in the video and you made your very own version of this, I would love to see it. Upload it to Instagram if you could, and tag me in the image. So, like, press into the image, tag me in there, not just in the caption, because the caption stuff, it, like, disappears after a little while, so I don't see all that stuff. But if you tag me in the image, I can check it out. I can show you some love. I love seeing what you guys create, so that'd be super duper cool. So for playing around with Fuse and bringing 3D objects into Photoshop and posing them and messing with the colors and all those wind effects and everything else that we did in this tutorial, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. Get it? Got it? Good. Nathaniel Dodson, tutvid.com. I'll catch you in the next one. And before you go, make sure you subscribe to my channel for more great tutorials every day. Also, buy my course. It helps us do what we do, and this channel is supported by viewers just like you. You can also just click the thumbnail and watch another video from this channel. See you next time, guys.